Joe Sodler had been blind for 6 years. His blindness was caused by atrophy of the optical nerve. One night, Joe tripped over the dog's dish, which had been left on the step. Subsequently, he fell down the basement stairs, and as he fell, his head slammed against the wall. And suddenly, a miracle of miracles, his vision was restored. All of a sudden, Joe could see things he hadn't seen in years, even the face of his 5-year-old daughter. Can you imagine such an incident? Can you imagine how this event made him feel? People kept asking him, "How did this happen, Joe?" And Joe told God, "Did it." It was Joe's firm belief that God used the dog dish and the basement stairs in the wall to effect his miraculous healing. He gave God complete credit. Joe's experience and his interpretation of that experience reminds me of something that Albert Einstein once said. There are 2 ways to live your life. One, as though nothing is a miracle, and the other as though everything is a miracle. Now, I wouldn't attempt to disagree with Einstein, but I'd say there's a third alternative. Yes, everything in life is a miracle, but we need to leave room for those rare instances that occur every once in a while when something so extraordinarily happens that there seems to be no explanation than that God intervened in someone's life in a wonderful way, or something happened that wasn't supposed to happen. Dr. Craig Brian Lawson tells a story of Al Marino. He says that by every law of physics and medicine, Marino should be dead. Marino was a window washer in the towering skyscrapers high above Manhattan. He rode the platforms with his brother Edgar high into the sky to wash the windows of those skyscrapers. And from his perch he could look down to see on the pavement far below where people looked like ants. However, on December 7th, 2007, a catastrophe struck the Marino family. The 2 brothers worked on a 47-story high-rise, and their platform collapsed. And the Marino brothers fell from the sky. As you might expect, Edgar died from the fall. However, Al survived. "If you're a believer in miracles, this would be one," said his doctor. "No," says Larson, "Al didn't land on a passing airplane or catch his shirt on a flagpole or anything else amazing happen that you see in the movies. He fell the entire 47 stories on the pavement below, just like his brother. But somehow he survived that 47-story fall. For 2 weeks, he hung onto life by a thread. Then on Christmas Day of that year, he spoke and reached out and touched the nurse's face. 1 month later, the doctors were saying that he would probably walk again someday. Do you believe in miracles? We desperately want to, don't we? Don't we want to believe in those type of miracles? 700 years before the coming of Christ, the prophet Isaiah was describing the age of the Messiah. He said that when the Messiah comes, then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue will shout for joy. Now, two of these prophecies are fulfilled in today's lesson from the Gospel of Mark. Mark tells us that Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went to Sidon, down near Lake Galilee, and to the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought with him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place a hand on him. Jesus, place a hand on this man that he may be healed. That's interesting. It's interesting. Jesus didn't heal the man the way that the people asked. Have you noticed that happens in your own life? God sometimes works in your life, but not exactly in the way that you specified. Jesus didn't put the hand on the man. Rather, he took him aside, away from the crowd, and put his finger in the man's ears, and then spat and touched the man's tongue. Then he looked up into the heavens with a deep sigh, said to the man, Ephphatha, that means be open. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosed, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded the man and those who were with him not to tell anyone about this miracle. But you know, when you tell somebody not to say something, they do it. And the more he told them to maintain their silence about his mighty works, the more they started talking about them. People were overwhelmed with amazement in Jesus' ability. He's done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. People were amazed when they saw the things that Jesus did, particularly his acts of healing. He healed those who were in distress physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And it makes sense that people were impressed. You know, medicine was very primitive in New Testament times. That's one reason why life was very short. If you had a disease, where would you turn? You and I simply, you just don't realize many times how fortunate we are to have the benefits of modern medicine. And almost every day, there are advances that we never hear of, such as things like stem cell research or gene editing and many other medical knowledge that's revolutionizing the practice of medicine today. In fact, one expert says that the advances of medicine over the next 2 decades will be almost unimaginable. For example, if you have liver failure in the near future, you won't go to an organ donor list or wait for a new liver. It may be possible that a new replacement liver will be printed on a 3D printer in a medical laboratory right here in Norwalk. A liver designed especially for you. That thing's getting very close, according to some people in the field. How about the replacement of a heart or lungs or a kidney? Well, we're not there yet. But hang in there, folks. The time's getting very close, according to some experts. People in Jesus' time could only pray for the miracles that you and I experience every day. But they'll take care of it. We take these things for granted, thanks primarily to the marvels of modern medicine. But people who lived in biblical times could not even imagine such advances. So when they discovered a man in their midst who was blind and could not see, and deaf to hear, the mute to speak, the lame to walk, they were astonished. He's done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. People traveled for miles on foot to seek help for loved ones and for themselves. And most of them were not disappointed. Now, I say most, because physically Christ, while he was encased in human flesh, could not be everywhere at the same time. But Jesus had compassion on those who sought him out, but there were only so many hours in a day. Besides, healing the hurting was not his primary mission. His primary mission was to preach the good news of deliverance and healing for all people. But still, he responded to people who were in need, whatever that need might be. And he performed miracles, all kinds of miracles. But most significantly, he performed miracles of healing. The question of today is, does God still perform such miracles? Some very devout Christians say no. They say the day of miracles is past. Now, you may know that both Martin Luther and John Calvin, two of the great leaders of the Protestant Reformation, were in this camp. But the miracles were something of the past. But many other Christians believe this as well. They cite Jesus' words that his miracles were but signs affirming that who he was, what he said he was. And you know, that makes some sense too. You know, today we don't have to witness his miraculous powers to believe that he is the Son of God. We have our Bibles, which contain numerous eyewitness reports from people who were there when he healed the blind, the deaf, the lame, and the mute. We don't need miracles to know that Jesus Christ is who he says he is. And we do have the wonders of modern medicine. People are actually living nearly twice as long in the average than did they in biblical times. Now, that doesn't mean we'll still not be at the mercy of the forces that can destroy us. That doesn't mean that many of us will not destroy ourselves. You know, there was a news report last winter that the average lifespan of adults in this country actually shrunk in 2017 because of the opioid epidemic. The number of suicide continues to grow as well. And of course, there are those lives lost to gun violence. Now, just because many people are living longer than ever does not mean that we will no longer need to pray to God or have God intervene in our lives or the lives of those we love. But it does mean that we will not be as vulnerable to sickness and death as people were when Jesus was teaching and healing. Now, this causes us to do some rethinking. Think about that. It causes us to rethink in ways in which God answers our prayers, doesn't it? If we look at it. Makes us think a little different than the people in Jesus' day or the writers of the New Testament. You know, there are two things we need to recognize about the miracles of healing. First of all, we need to get rid of the idea that the more faith you have, the more likely it is that you will experience a miracle. Whoa, what are you saying, preacher? Recently, a radio pastor gave the best response I heard to the question of faith and healing. The pastor was wise, grandfatherly gentleman who has a calm, reassuring voice that can melt all fear. A lady on the broadcast, who was obviously crying, said, "Pastor, I was born blind, and I've been blind all my life. I don't mind being blind, but I have some well-meaning friends who tell me that if I had more faith, I could be healed." Now, this was evidently causing the woman some distress. Not only was she blind, but her so-called friends were telling her it was her fault. If she just had enough faith, God would heal her. The radio pastor asked her something that I felt was quite humorous, but so right on target. "Tell me," he asked this blind lady, "do you carry one of those white canes?" "Yes, I do," she replied. "Then," said the radio pastor, "the next time someone says that, hit them over the head with the cane and say, if you had more faith, it wouldn't hurt." You know, what a wonderful statement. Healing is not proportional to our faith. Too many fine Christians have guilt piled on to people who have suffering bodies because people have told them that if they had more faith, they would be healed. It's a lie. Some of the greatest Christians who have ever lived have suffered terrible deaths. And of course, everyone is going to die sooner or later. Prayers are not answered according to the amount of faith we have. Now, I did not say don't pray. I did not say that. I did not say God does not hear or respond to our prayers. Just follow along with me. In the holistic field of medicine, there are three healers: the doctor, the nurse, and the pastor. The pastor is there to assure the patient that God is present and to calm the patient into trusting the doctors and nurses communicating to the patient that God will guide them in the healing process. In my experience, I have had doctors tell me that they have done all they could. Now it's up to the Lord. And it has been found that at least 75% of doctors believe in miracles. Now, we also have to recognize that most prayers do not lead in physical healing. Now, some of you don't want to hear that. I know you don't want to hear that, but it's true. Most of us have known at least one person who has laid at death's door, and people have prayed and prayed and prayed for healing, but physical healing has not come. Note what I said. Physical healing has not come. Most of us are mature enough to realize that prayer isn't a heavenly vending machine in which you put our prayers in and automatically the answer we desire comes out. If we could do that, there would be no need. There would be no need for the belief in God. Faith is a belief in the unseen. Now we see through the glass dimly. But that doesn't mean that our prayers are unheard or unanswered either. That doesn't mean that. Let me give you an example. Sociologist and pastor Tony Campolo was challenged by a friend to add ministry of healing to his work. Campolo decided to try at a service, at a church in Oregon. On impulse, at the end of the service, he announced to any who wanted to remain that they would be having a healing service. He warned them that they should not expect much, but he would be glad to pray with them and anoint them with some oil that he had. Campolo was surprised when about 30 people stayed for this event. He prayed with each one individually, hearing all kinds of requests for deliverance, including many with physical illnesses. 4 days later, he received a call from a woman who indicated that he had prayed for her husband in his service. Her husband, she said, had cancer. Notice I said, had cancer. Yes, he's dead now. Disheartened, Campolo listened further to her story. She recounted how prior to this event, her husband was quite angry with God and unbearable to be around. Since that night of the healing service, however, he was different. The last 4 days have been the best days of our lives together, the woman said, and then added, he was not cured, but he was healed. Wow, what a great testimony. Those prayers did make a difference. Healing did take place, even if being cured from cancer did not. Now, this should say to us, never give up on prayer. God uses all kinds of means to offer help to his people, just as Jesus used different means to heal people. Sometimes it is a prayer of the pastor. Sometimes it's just the presence of a loved one in the times of crisis. Maybe it's just the note that we're going to send to people this week. That you are missed, you are loved. Nurse Susan M. Bottom. Maybe it's somebody we see on the prayer march, prayer walk today. Nurse Susan M. Bottoms tells of the night she admitted a dying pastor to her hospital ICU. The man was at death's door, and the doctor urged his wife to call in the family. The wife had a very special favor to ask the hospital staff. Could they arrange for her son James to visit his father? Now, it wasn't as simple a request as you might think. James was a convicted murderer serving a life sentence in the local prison. But the hospital staff pulled all the necessary strings to get James transported from the prison to the hospital. It was the least they could do for a man who was dying. No one in the hospital that night could forget the sight of a desperately ill father joyfully hugging his wayward son. The two men clung to one another for a long time, enjoying every second of their brief time together. That night after James returned to prison, his father seemed to regain his strength. Within a short time, the pastor was discharged from the hospital. The man who had been lying at death's door lived another year before passing away. Now, can anyone doubt that the sight of his son made a difference in this dying man's recovery? However, it was just temporary. You know, the human body is complicated. Healing may take place when emotions are stirred. Healing may take place when a deep emotional wound is cleaned. A word of forgiveness has been known to heal a broken body. All kinds of things can make a difference in whether we are healed or not, including prayer. Jesus healed people in many ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. If you have someone who has experienced a crisis in their life, pray for them. Do it like a mature Christian, recognizing that God does not always work the way we have specified. But I can tell you this, friends, God does work. And every once in a while, at God's discretion, a miracle occurs. Let us pray.